To date, I've made 4 entire videos looking at rock and pop songs that are based on classical compositions, and yet there are still plenty more examples for us to look at. So here are 19 more songs that are based on classical pieces. Almost 20 years after its initial release, the song For the Damaged Coda by blonde Redhead has recently seen a resurgence in popularity after being featured in the cartoon show Rick and Morty, and then subsequently becoming a popular meme. However, what you may not have known is For the Damaged Coda is directly based on Chopin's Nocturne in F minor, number 1. For the Damaged Coda uses a subtly modified version of Chopin's opening melody, and accompanies it with the exact same chord progression. For the Damaged Coda was actually itself sampled in 2018 by rapper B.O.B. for his track Bo Biverse. So this is a rap song based on an alt-rock song based on a Chopin piece.
For every agent they sent my way, did not have enough money to send a rocket to space.
Lana Del Rey's 2014 song Old Money is partially based on Nino Rota's What is a Youth.
Where have you been? Where did you go?
What is a youth? Impetuous fire.
Lana Del Rey has lifted the first 2 bars of Rota's melody. However, after that she has then diverged down a similar but different melodic line. She's also changed the meter from the original 3/4 to 4/4. However, this doesn't make much difference really, as both melodies are sung in a loose free time with no clear pulse. Now, although What is a Youth sounds like a Renaissance era ballad, it's actually far more modern than that, having been composed for the 1968 film adaptation of Romeo and Juliet. So, strictly speaking, What is a Youth is film music, not classical music. But what I find interesting here is the chain of influences. For his Romeo and Juliet soundtrack, Nino Rota was emulating the style of Elizabethan composers such as John Dowland.
All the day, the sun that lends me shine.
And then, over 40 years later, Lana Del Rey has then in turn lifted from Rota's Neo-Elizabethan music and reworked it into a new modern pop ballad. You're probably familiar with Eric Satie's Je ne puis dire number 1. Well, the melody of Je ne puis dire was used in the chorus of Janet Jackson's 2001 track, Someone to Call My Lover. The melody is largely unaltered, though it has been stretched out to fit into 4/4 time, rather than the 3/4 meter of the original piece. The Janet Jackson song also swaps the chord progression around, so we get D moving to G, rather than G resolving to D. Allegedly, Janet Jackson had been a fan of Satie's Je ne puis dire from a young age, but she'd never known what the piece was called. Then, years later, when she was shopping in Ralph Lauren, she heard it being played in the background. The shop gave Jackson the CD that they'd been playing, and she took it straight to her producer, Jimmy Jam, who incorporated it into her latest track. 1 year earlier, Satie's Je ne puis dire featured in a different pop song, Flowers by Sweet Female Attitude. This time though, rather than lifting from the melody like Janet Jackson did, Flowers instead lifts from Satie's iconic chord progression. One of the best known melodies in classical music is Beethoven's Ode to Joy from the final movement of his Ninth Symphony. Being so well known and so straightforward, it's no surprise that Ode to Joy's melody has been repurposed countless times. In 1967, the Seekers used it as the basis of their song Emerald City.
Take me to the Emerald City, down yellow brick roads by...
And almost 4 decades later, the band Bright Eyes reworked Ode to Joy's melody for their song Road to Joy.
The sun came up with no conclusions, flowers sleeping in their beds.
Bright Eyes have altered the first bar of Ode to Joy's melody, largely by just lowering each note by 1 step down the scale. They've also simplified the chord progression down to just 1 droning chord. Some have suggested that the instrumental guitar break from The Killer's Mr. Brightside is also based on the melody from Ode to Joy. Now, although the first bar of both melodies are identical, after that all they share is a similar melodic contour, i.e. their melodies go up and down in the same places. So although perhaps the Killers were drawing inspiration from Ode to Joy, the melody they came up with is quite different. In a previous video, I looked at how Can't Help Falling in Love and Surrender by Elvis Presley are both based on classical pieces. However, there are at least 4 more Elvis tunes that also owe their existence to classical pieces of music. For example, Elvis's 1960 song Tonight Is So Right for Love is effectively an upbeat rock and roll version of Offenbach's Buckaroo.
Hold me tight, the moon is so bright, tonight is so right for love.
Tonight Is So Right for Love was released on the soundtrack to the film GI Blues, in which Elvis played the lead role. However, due to copyright restrictions, the European version of the film and soundtrack didn't include the song Tonight Is So Right for Love, and instead featured a replacement song called Tonight's All Right for Love. And interestingly, just like the song it was written to replace, Tonight's All Right for Love is also based on a classical piece of music. This time, Tales from the Vienna Woods by Johann Strauss II.
Hold me tight, the moon is so bright, tonight the night is right.
Another Elvis song based on a classical piece is Today, Tomorrow and Forever, written by Bernie Baum, Florence Kay and Bill Giant. Today, Tomorrow and Forever is directly based on Franz Liszt's 1850 piano piece Liebestraum. And the final Elvis track we'll look at is his classic hit It's Now or Never. It's Now or Never is effectively an English language cover of the Neapolitan song O So Mio.
It's now or never. Come hold me tight.
Now, whether O So Mio is strictly speaking a classical piece of music is up for debate. It's certainly in the repertoire of many classical singers, but it's perhaps better classified as a traditional Neapolitan song. But what is clear is that its melody has certainly been influential. Beyond Elvis's It's Now or Never, O So Mio was also the basis of the 1949 song There's No Tomorrow, sung by Tony Martin.
There's no tomorrow.
And allegedly, it's this Tony Martin recording which first introduced Elvis to O So Mio. Perry Como's 1957 classic Catch a Falling Star is also based on a classical piece of music. Songwriters Paul Vance and Lou Pockris slowed down the melody lifted from Brahms's 1880 Academic Festival Overture and used it as the basis of their song.
Catch a falling star and put it in your pocket, never let it fade away.
Another song to be seemingly based on a Brahms melody is Love of My Life by Carlos Santana and Dave Matthews. Love of My Life has a very similar melody to that heard in the third movement of Brahms's Third Symphony. In a previous video, we looked at how Billy Joel had adapted Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata for his 1984 track This Night. But 8 years earlier, rock band Kiss had already lifted from the same sonata for their track Great Expectations. Kiss's use of the Beethoven melody is far less extensive though. It can only be heard in the song's intro and instrumental guitar break. The bossa nova and jazz standard How Insensitive, written by Antonio Carlos Jobim, seems to be inspired by Chopin's Prelude in E minor No. 4. Both melodies use this flat 6-5 motif, and have very similar chord progressions, both following a chromatic descending line.
How insensitive I must have seemed when he told me that he loved me.
The 1984 hit Since Yesterday by Strawberry Switchblade borrows from the third movement of Sibelius's Fifth Symphony. Since Yesterday's opening fanfare is directly lifted from Sibelius, although they have changed one note. The 1979 song If I Had You by the Corgis is based on Rachmaninoff's Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini, Variation 18. But as the name suggests, Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini, Variation 18 is itself based on a piece by Paganini, his 24th Caprice. Now, don't worry if you can't hear a likeness between the Rachmaninoff piece and the Paganini Caprice on which it was based. Whereas with the Corgis song, they just lifted the entire melody and harmony of Rachmaninoff's piece to form the basis of their own song, the way that Rachmaninoff has lifted from Paganini is far more subtle and nuanced. Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini Variation 18 is a variation on the original Paganini melody. In classical music, a variation is when a melody is taken and then transformed into a new melody. In the case of Variation 18, Rachmaninoff has inverted Paganini's melody. In other words, he has turned it upside down. So rather than ascending a minor third from the first note like the original melody does, Rachmaninoff's melody descends a minor third. And then rather than descending a semitone for the next note, Rachmaninoff ascends a semitone, and so on. This new melody that Rachmaninoff has arrived at by adapting the 5-note theme from the original Paganini piece then forms the basis of the entire variation. Rachmaninoff's repurposing of Paganini's melody into a new piece of music is far from a unique example. In all of the videos I've made to date about classical music informing new music, I've almost always been talking about rock and pop music lifting from classical pieces. But in fact, the idea of drawing from excerpts of older pieces to write new music is actually far more common in classical music. Across the centuries, composers have often adapted melodies of the composers that came before them. As we saw from the Rachmaninoff example, sometimes these borrowed excerpts are so transformed and adapted that if it wasn't for the title, the likeness to the original piece would be completely indetectable. However, sometimes classical composers will lift entire pieces and repurpose them, much like we see in pop and rock music. For example, Charles Gounod's 1853 setting of Ave Maria is built on Bach's famous Prelude No. 1 in C major. As you can hear, the original Bach piece is clearly recognisable, with Gounod having only made very small changes to the original prelude. And thank you as always to all of the wonderful people who support me on Patreon, including the names you see on screen right now, and Andre Sainz-Diaja, Andrew Brown, Andrew Sussman, Austin Barrett, Austin Russell, Bob McKinstry, Brittany Parker, Cameron Oliveira, Colin Aiken, Chris Cabell, Christopher Ryan, Courageous Chameleon, David Rivers, Donald Howard, Dr. Darren Wicks, Elena Skochenko, Esben Hansen, Eugene Leroy, FD Hodor, Guillermo Latona, Hamish Brocklebank, Hugo Miller, James Ko, J.A. Kokensparger, John Dye, Josh Sanderlin, Justin Vigor, Mark Height, Mark Ziegenhagen, Max O'Keefe, Melody Composer Squared, Melanie Schonert, Michael Vivian, Nancy Gillard, Nathan Lawrence, Nathaniel Park, Paul Miller, Paul Pazel, Peter Dunphy, Piotr Shmanovsky, Richard Pride, Roger Clay, Sam Lynn, Scott Fenley, Sean Kennedy, Steve Daly, Stephen Lazaro, Tim Beaker, Toma Aharoni, Trisha Adams, Tim Payne, Toot, Victor Levy, Vidad Flowers, Vladimir Kodakov, and Volti.